That's exactly what happened to the Johnson family, a black billionaire family quietly boarding first class like any other VIP traveler. But the flight attendant didn't see wealth, respect, or power. She only saw what she assumed. Within minutes, they were escorted off the plane in front of stunned passengers. But the twist. Moments later, the airline staff discovered the shocking truth. The family they had just humiliated weren't just passengers. They were the majority owners of the airline. What happens next will blow your mind. Stay with us as we break down the full story, chapter by jaw-dropping chapter. And if you're into real-life drama with shocking twists, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that makes you think twice. It all started on a sunny morning at LAX, where the buzz of international travel filled the air. The Johnson family, well-dressed, calm and exuding quiet confidence, arrived at the terminal with plenty of time before their flight to London. They moved effortlessly through security, attracting more than a few admiring glances. Charles Johnson, a distinguished man in his early 50s, wore a tailored navy suit and gold cufflinks that shimmered under the terminal lights. His wife Dana turned heads in a soft peach designer dress and matching heels. Their teenage children, Maya and Jordan, were dressed fashionably but modestly, just another affluent family heading off on a first-class getaway. As they approached the gate, a staff member scanned their tickets, smiled and guided them toward the jet bridge. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Johnson. Enjoy your flight." The family stepped into the aircraft and made their way to the first-class cabin, placing their carry-ons in the overhead bins and settling into their spacious leather seats. Dana handed Maya a neck pillow. Jordan popped in earbuds. Charles unfolded a newspaper. They didn't speak loudly, demand anything, or even draw attention to themselves. But not everyone was as composed. From the galley, one flight attendant had been watching them since they boarded. Her name was Karen, mid-40s, stiff posture, with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eye. As soon as the Johnsons took their seats, her demeanor shifted. She leaned toward a younger attendant beside her, and muttered just loud enough for a few passengers to hear, "Are they in the right seats? First class isn't economy." The younger attendant looked uncertain. "They showed first-class tickets," she whispered back. Karen frowned and walked down the aisle with purpose, stopping directly in front of Charles. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I need to see your tickets," she said sharply. Charles calmly reached into his blazer pocket and handed them over. "Of course," he said with a smile. Karen barely glanced at the passes before declaring, "This section is reserved for priority travelers. You need to move to the back." Dana looked up, her expression controlled but strained. "These are priority tickets," she replied evenly. Karen crossed her arms. "You'll need to leave these seats, unless I'm told otherwise." Charles tried again, more firmly this time. "We paid for these seats. We're where we belong." By now, other passengers were listening in. Some looked away awkwardly. A few whispered to each other. Maya shifted uncomfortably in her seat while Jordan looked down embarrassed. Karen didn't back down. Instead, she radioed for security. "I have passengers refusing to move from first class. Please assist." Security arrived within minutes. Charles let out a slow breath, looked at his family and said, "Let's not make a scene. We'll handle this properly." With quiet dignity, the Johnsons gathered their belongings and walked off the plane, escorted by airport staff, leaving a cabin full of murmurs, shocked stares and one smug flight attendant behind them. What Karen didn't know, that moment would come back to haunt her in ways she never imagined. In stunned disbelief, the Johnson family gathered their belongings under the scrutinizing gaze of the flight attendant and the growing curiosity of the passengers. Charles Johnson, while clearly irritated, remained composed as he stood up, adjusted his cufflinks, and helped Dana with her bag. His voice was low but firm. "We'll handle this the right way," he said, casting a meaningful glance at his children, silently urging them to stay calm. Maya clutched her phone with shaking hands, trying not to cry. Jordan looked furious, but said nothing. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. A teenager seated a few rows behind them quietly pulled out her phone and started recording. "They didn't even do anything," the girl whispered to her seatmate. As the family exited the cabin, escorted by two uniformed airline staff members, several passengers turned their heads, some clearly uncomfortable, others silently watching as if something historic might be unfolding. No one spoke up, though one older man did offer a sympathetic look as the family passed. Once off the plane, the Johnsons were directed to a quiet area near the gate. A few minutes later, they sat in the airline's private lounge, an elegant space with leather chairs and glass walls overlooking the tarmac. But the mood was anything but relaxed. Dana's hands moved swiftly as she pulled out her phone and dialed a private contact. She spoke calmly but with unmistakable weight. "This is Dana Johnson. Activate Plan B," she said, then hung up without another word. Charles sat beside her staring out the window at the plane they'd just been removed from. He wasn't just angry, he was calculating. His mind was already moving 2 steps ahead. Meanwhile, back at the gate, the mood was far more casual. The flight attendant, Karen, returned to the galley with a satisfied grin. She joked with another crew member, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction. They tried to pull some kind of I've seen it before. First class isn't for show-offs. The other attendant looked uneasy, but didn't reply. A few feet away, a gate agent chuckled to herself. They'll probably try to complain. People like that always do. What none of them realized was that things were already in motion, at a level far above their pay grade. As the aircraft doors closed and the plane began slowly backing away from the gate, an urgent message flashed across the pilot's screen. A direct transmission from airline corporate headquarters. Hold immediately, do not take off. The pilot, startled, relayed the order to the tower. Flight 477 requesting hold position at gate. We've been told to delay departure. Back inside the terminal, a phone rang at the manager's desk. The airport operations manager picked up and nearly dropped the phone after hearing the caller's identity. In a hushed voice, they turned to the nearest gate agent. Get that family back. Now, the balance of power had just shifted. The Johnsons were no longer just passengers, they were about to remind the airline who truly ran the skies. Inside the cockpit, the pilot adjusted his headset as a sudden directive crackled over the secure channel from airline headquarters. Flight 477, hold at the gate, do not proceed. The Johnson family is to be brought back on board, immediately. The pilot blinked in surprise. Repeat please, he asked, unsure he had heard correctly. The voice on the other end came back, clearer this time, and more urgent. Repeat, the Johnson family is to be reboarded immediately. Direct order from corporate. Full authority override. The crew exchanged confused glances as the jet slowly came to a halt. Just feet from the taxiway, the captain announced a delay over the intercom, careful not to give any details. Back in the cabin, passengers looked around, puzzled. Meanwhile, at the gate, the terminal staff scrambled. The gate manager, who had just gotten off the call from the regional vice president, rushed over to Karen, who was still smugly organizing drink menus at the front of the cab. Karen, the manager said, slightly breathless. You need to come with me. Now. Karen furrowed her brow. What is it? I'm working. If this is about those people. The manager cut her off. Just come. Without another word, Karen followed the manager into a nearby operations room. The air was tense. A senior supervisor was already waiting at the desk, holding a manila folder. Wordlessly, she handed it to Karen and stepped back. Karen opened the folder, confusion still on her face, until she began to read. Inside were full-color magazine covers, Forbes profiles and internal memos marked confidential. There were photos of Charles Johnson standing beside some of the most powerful CEOs in the world. One article was titled, The Quiet Billionaire, How Charles and Dana Johnson Acquired a 51% Stake in the World's Fastest Growing Airline. Another page outlined a major investment made just months ago, one that had largely gone unnoticed by the public, but had made waves in the airline industry. The Johnson family had become the majority stakeholders in the very airline Karen worked for. What is this? Karen stammered, her voice hollow. The manager leaned in and said flatly, those people you kicked off the plane, they own it. They're not just flying first class, they are first class. Karen's face turned pale. Her legs wobbled slightly as she sat down, all the color drained from her cheeks. The weight of what she had done hit her like a freight train. She had humiliated the owners of the airline in front of passengers on camera, and with witness. The manager folded her arms. Corporate is furious. They want the family reboarded immediately. And as for you, they're reviewing your actions. Suddenly, the smug confidence Karen had clung to all morning vanished. I didn't know, she whispered. Exactly, the supervisors. Maybe it's time you learn. The Johnsons had barely settled into the quiet, luxurious lounge when they received the call. A calm, professional voice on the other end was apologetic, but firm. Mr. Johnson, we sincerely regret the inconvenience. Please return to the plane. Your seats are waiting, and we are taking steps to address the situation. Charles, who had remained composed through the entire ordeal, nodded at his family. He exchanged a quick glance with Dana, who gave him a reassuring smile. They gathered their things without a word, and stood, making their way back to the gate, where they had first been escorted off the plane. The staff at the gate now looked flustered, surprised by the sudden shift in the situation. They had no idea that the Johnsons were returning as they re-entered the jet bridge. An airport employee was waiting to escort them. This time, however, it was different. There were no questions, no scanning of tickets, no resistance. The staff moved aside respectfully, and Charles, Dana, Maya and Jordan were led straight to the plane, where the atmosphere had completely changed. The moment the Johnson family stepped back into the cabin, the passengers who had witnessed the earlier drama sat up straight. Some gasped, others whispered, but most were just staring in disbelief. Then a few brave souls began to clap. At first it was tentative, a slow clap that seemed awkward and unsure, but as the Johnsons continued down the aisle, the applause grew louder. By the time they reached their first-class seats, the entire cabin was applauding. Charles nodded at the passengers, his face showing a faint appreciative smile, but his demeanor remained calm. Karen, now pale and shaken, stood at the front of the cabin, forced to watch the scene unfold. Her lips quivered, and her shoulders slumped as the applause continued. She had been caught in her ignorance, and it was now impossible to ignore the reality of what had just happened. She had no choice but to approach the Johnsons and apologize. Her voice was shaky as she said, "Mr. Johnson, I am deeply sorry for the misunderstanding. I didn't realize." Charles looked at her for a moment, his gaze steady. He took a deep breath, then said, "Let this be a lesson. You never know who you're disrespecting." Dana, sitting beside him, simply nodded, but there was no anger in her expression, only a quiet dignity. Karen looked like she might say more, but instead, she just turned away and retreated toward the back of the plane, her face flushed with embarrassment. As the plane finally took off, the air was thick with tension and discomfort, but the damage had already been done, not just to Karen, but to the reputation of the airline as a whole. The incident didn't just end when the plane left the gate, it went viral. A teenager, who had filmed the entire incident, posted the video online, and within hours, it was everywhere. The clip, showing the Johnsons being dragged off the plane, was shared millions of times, sparking a national conversation about racial profiling. People were outraged. Some claimed it was simply another case of unfair treatment. Others called out the airline for their failure to vet their staff properly. Back at the airline headquarters, the CEO had no choice but to act. An internal email went out almost immediately to all employees. Effective immediately, all crew members must undergo mandatory anti-discrimination training. This includes sensitivity courses and an examination of our internal policies regarding customer treatment. We will not tolerate any form of racial profiling or mistreatment of passengers. It was clear, the airline was now scrambling to salvage, not just its reputation, but also its future. But no matter what they did, they couldn't undo the damage that had already been done. And for Karen, the lessons of that day would linger far beyond the flight. The plane touched down in London, to the hum of excitement on board, but it was not the destination that was causing the buzz. It was the story that had already gone viral, and the Johnson family's next move. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, passengers were already on their phones, refreshing social media, sharing videos and reading the latest headlines. News outlets across the globe were picking up the story of the Johnsons' ejection from their own plane, sparking discussions not only about racial profiling in first class, but about what it meant to be an empowered, silent force in the business world. Upon arrival, Charles, Dana, and their 2 children stepped off the plane in their usual composed manner, but this time, they weren't just arriving in London for a business trip, they were about to take their message to the world. A press conference was scheduled for the following day, and the Johnsons knew this was their moment to do something impactful. When the cameras flashed and the reporters crowded into the conference room, Charles stepped up to the podium, his expression calm but resolute. The questions about the viral incident came fast, but Charles didn't take the bait. "We're not here to shame anyone," Charles began, his voice steady, "though we are here to remind everyone that respect, dignity and fairness are not optional, no matter who you are or where you sit." He paused and glanced over at Dana, who nodded at him with quiet support. Then he continued, "What we are here to announce is something we believe will make a real difference in the world, an initiative that goes beyond one bad moment and changes the trajectory of aviation as a whole. We're proud to introduce Wings for All." A collective gasp rippled through the room, and the cameras clicked furiously as Charles outlined the new foundation. Wings for All is a billion-dollar initiative dedicated to increasing diversity and inclusion within the aviation industry. This foundation will fund scholarships for underrepresented students who want to become pilots, create training programs for airline staff to ensure that passengers of all backgrounds are treated with the respect they deserve, and work to change the culture of an industry that still has a long way to go in embracing diversity. The press conference turned from controversy to hope, as Charles and Dana shared their vision for a more inclusive future. The Johnson family wasn't just using their wealth to make a statement, they were laying the groundwork for a new, more equitable aviation world. As the event wrapped up, The attention quickly turned back to Karen. Back at the airline headquarters, she had been given an ultimatum: undergo intensive sensitivity training, and publicly apologize for her actions, or resign. The airline could no longer afford to let her behavior go unchecked. Much to everyone's surprise, Karen chose to take the train. She issued a heartfelt public apology, acknowledging her mistake and vowing to learn from it. Months later, in an unexpected twist, Karen became one of the company's most vocal advocates for diversity and inclusion, traveling across the country to promote the very values she had once resisted. She became a champion for the changes the airline needed, using her position to help implement the kind of transformation the Johnsons had envisioned all along. As for the Johnsons, they returned to their quiet, powerful role behind the scene. They never sought out the spotlight, nor did they engage in further media attention. Their actions had already spoken volumes. Charles, when asked in a rare interview about the Foundation's future, smiled and said with characteristic humility, "We don't just fly first class, we build." And with that, the Johnson family proved that true power doesn't always come from making noise, it comes from making change. In the end, the story of the Johnson family's flight wasn't just about a flight gone wrong, it was a profound lesson about assumptions, power and respect. What started as a brief uncomfortable moment of misunderstanding in a first-class cabin snowballed into something far greater. The Johnsons, in the face of adversity, made a decision that would resonate far beyond that plane. Instead of reacting with anger or revenge, they chose a path of class, dignity and impact, showing the world that there are far more powerful ways to handle injustice than through retaliation. When the Johnsons were wrongfully ejected from the plane, they could have lashed out, demanded an apology, or sought legal action on the spot. It would have been easy to let their emotions guide them, to get caught up in the heat of the moment. They had every right to do so. After all, they were humiliated, their integrity questioned, and their dignity dismissed. But that wasn't their approach. They took a breath, looked beyond the personal offense, and saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just about them. It was about setting a new standard, one that could inspire change, not just for themselves, but for others who might face similar treatment. Instead of letting their frustration rule the day, they transformed a negative moment into a platform for something bigger. Their decision to create Wings for All, a billion-dollar initiative to promote diversity in aviation, was a direct reflection of their character. It wasn't about shaming the flight attendant or the airline, it was about creating lasting change. They used their experience as a springboard to address a larger issue: systemic biases, and the need for greater representation in a traditionally homogeneous industry. By choosing to address the problem at its core, they turned a personal affront into a movement for the betterment of society. This choice to take the higher road didn't just affect the Johnson family, it sent a powerful message to everyone watching. By refusing to stoop to anger or bitterness, they demonstrated a level of leadership and grace that left a lasting impression on those who witnessed their story. They reminded the world of a simple but profound truth: you never know who you're talking down to. What was a quick assumption, a simple glance at a first-class ticket, and a snap judgment, turned out to be a costly mistake for the flight attendant, who failed to recognize the true power in the room. Karen's story became a cautionary tale, one that reminded us all that no one is immune from the consequences of their actions. Her mistake cost her more than just a temporary embarrassment. It was a reminder that assumptions, especially those fueled by bias, can have far-reaching consequences. Karen learned this lesson the hard way, but she eventually turned it into an opportunity for growth. Her commitment to undergo sensitivity training, and later advocate for diversity within the airline, was a humbling acknowledgement of her own personal evolution. For the Johnsons, though, the lesson was always about more than just confronting one moment of injustice. They chose to take the opportunity to create systemic change, reminding us that true power isn't about exerting control or seeking vengeance. It's about making a positive, lasting impact that reverberates far beyond the initial conflict. They didn't just seek to right a wrong, they sought to make the world a better place, not through words, but through action. And in doing so, they proved that real strength comes not from the desire to be right, but from the courage to do what's right. So what would you have done in their shoes? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story made you think, inspired you, or just shocked you, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines. Turn on notifications so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching, and remember, kindness costs nothing, but ignorance can cost everything.